So just do your best to communicate. That's the goal. That is what language is for. Here's your time usage pie chart. But again, you're always adjusting this to your goals and your priorities and what you are going to need to use the language for in the future. Hi everyone, quick reminder, this is the second half of the language diet. So if you haven't watched the first half yet, there will be a card on the screen to click, and the video will also be linked in the description. Watch that first if needed, then come back here for the rest. The first half covered core principles and input, and today we'll cover output and time usage. Thanks everyone, and happy language learning. Okay, on to output. Output is also known as production. Input, we're intaking things, and output, you're producing language. So writing and speaking are your output, and they can only begin once you've had sufficient input. Until you have things to actually talk about and communicate about, you probably don't need to speak much. But that's just for the brand new people. You can start a little bit, but know that it's going to be very limited, and it makes sense because if you don't know words, you can't really talk about stuff or write about stuff. All right, for speaking specifically, you have to get down pronunciation first. And for you to do that, you have to listen and listen and listen and imitate, especially in languages that have different phonemes than yours, different sounds that you are totally unfamiliar with. You've got to hear that. You've got to hear it so many times so your brain can learn to recognize and differentiate that sound before you can even take a crack at trying to reproduce that. Some people have a knack for it and can sort of imitate sounds right away, but for most people, it takes time. Like I said a moment ago, you can produce when you're ready. Once you have some things to talk about, it doesn't have to be the most complex thing in the world, and you do not need to produce perfectly, but once you have some things that you can communicate about, then it's time to start producing a little bit. The focus is on communication because that's in our principles, and you really don't need to sweat the mistakes. Please. So many people get scared away from speaking a language because they just think, oh, I'm going to say something wrong and then everybody's going to think I'm dumb. You don't need to. People don't think that. If somebody else does think that, that's their problem. They're just rude, especially if they know that you're trying to learn a language. Most people will be very understanding. So just do your best to communicate. That's the goal. That is what language is for. There are fluency demands for speaking and for writing, and these demands are different than input. When you are taking in language, you're recognizing it. When you're outputting language, you have to be able to consciously or unconsciously go back in your brain and find those things and take them back out and produce them. So you need, for speaking fluency, you need large vocab, and the more advanced you are, of course, the larger that's expected to be. You need good chunk knowledge, and you need the recall practice, the practice of going and finding the thing that you want to say. That is a separate skill than just recognizing the vocab. Chunk knowledge is like when you hear a full phrase over and over again. Think of it like this. In English, a lot of people might say, how's it going? I don't consciously think, okay, how and it or it is, but I'm going to combine those to hows and then it and then going. I don't build that sentence one at a time. I know it as a phrase, as a chunk, we would call that. That's a brief example. I suggest you look into that, what chunking in language means. It is a very important and valuable skill. It happens naturally when you have good input and a lot. Lastly, for speaking, we need to talk about circumlocution and negotiating meaning. When you are trying to talk to somebody and you don't have the exact words for what you need to say, you sort of find another way to explain it. That circumlocution, that is also its own skill. So you need the recall, you need the vocab, you need to be able to talk your way around something if you can't be as specific as you'd like. And lastly, you need to be able to negotiate meaning. So if my goal is communication and maybe I said something wrong and the person on the other end is willing to say, oh, let's use the bakery example. Say, they didn't hear if I said 10 croissants or 12 croissants. Maybe I said something in between. Maybe I just didn't speak very clearly. And maybe they will ask me. They'll ask me, combien, like how many? Maybe they'll ask me again. Maybe they'll give me one or the other options, right? Speaking in a language is very much a process of negotiation in that sense. Even native speakers, sometimes we don't understand each other. We have to say things again. We have to word it a different way to get the meaning across. That's normal. It's all part of this practice. Writing. So first, before you can write, obviously, you have to learn to read. You have to learn the writing system. You can't skip that. If you don't know the writing system and you can't read, well, you certainly can't write anything. So then what? Read. Read, read. The more you read, the more you'll recognize, the more you'll learn new vocab, acquire new vocab. You will start acquiring those language chunks so that you don't have to manually sort of build every single sentence start to finish. And as you become a better reader and you read more, you will naturally become a better writer. But you still need to put practice into, just like recalling for speaking, you need to practice the writing. Writing is a separate skill than just reading something and recognizing it. I would say the focus on communication, but you're going to use the extra time that writing provides because you're not standing there in front of somebody. They're not waiting for an instant response. Use your extra time to be careful with what you're saying, to address the needs, the formality, the context of the situation, and use appropriate resources. If you need to look up a couple extra words on an online dictionary or something to fill in the blanks or fill in your knowledge gaps, that's okay. And as long as it's not like everything that you were trying to say where it's totally beyond your reach, then it's fine to just get a little bit more information to help you. So once you have a base level in both, just like with reading and listening, you can prioritize. Like myself, I know that I'm never going to be writing, especially handwriting, like on paper. I'm almost never going to do that in Japanese. I might literally never do that in Japanese. So I don't focus on writing a lot, but I do focus on speaking. Here are some example practice opportunities. For writing, we've got social media. You might have class assignments if you're taking a language class, or assignments from a tutor. I know personally for the people that I tutor, I always give a variety of assignments, but you know, we don't just sleep on a skill or skip over it. You have to do that. So we have different level of writing assignments. Some are informal, some are very formal, some are, you know, persuasion essays, stuff like that. You have online video games. Quick anecdote, when I was in high school, after I took 2 years of Spanish, I was still really bad at Spanish. And when I started my third year, I convinced my mom to get me a subscription to an online game. I used it purposely to go and find native Spanish speakers and to talk with them on the game. And let me tell you, it was incredibly helpful. I learned so much, and it helped me with that recall, and it helped me practice communicating with people in a real way. It was awesome. You have to be smart about and be responsible. You know, don't do other dumb things you wouldn't do on the internet, like don't tell people where you live, stuff like that. But you can absolutely use it to communicate with people and have fun at the same time. And then you could text your friends who speak that language as well. You know, I could put pen pal on this list, but let's be honest, almost nobody's going to do that. You can. It would be great, but I doubt it's going to happen. On speaking, we've got conversation partners, conversation groups. These can happen in person or online. Again, be smart about it and be careful. There are websites that will help link you up with conversation partners, though I'm not a big fan because a lot of them have weird people trying to scam you on there. So be very cautious. There are a lot of conversation groups, especially around colleges and in major cities, things like that. You can often find conversation groups who, you know, they get together, they practice speaking a certain language just for the practice. If you got friends who speak the language, talk to them. You know, don't annoy them with it, but talk to them when you can. And if you've got a teacher or a tutor, something like that, those people are obviously great to talk to. One-on-one tutoring is obviously superior there because you get their dedicated time. But I know myself in high school and stuff, when I was in language classes or when I was in college in language classes, I would often stay after class to talk to my teacher, to talk to them in the target language. Okay, on to priorities and time usage. For beginners, your main priority is high quality input from real sources. Remember that we learn through understanding meaning, through real communication. That's how you're going to acquire a language. So we've got to find good sources that are approachable or attainable for us as beginners, that makes sense for us, right? Something that we're interested in and something that we can understand in a meaningful way. And then we just read and listen to a lot. We need lots and lots and lots of input because you're building a new language from scratch, basically. As we said, again, with finding materials, these topics should be familiar, they should be simple, they should be easy. If you already, or if you're starting a new language and you already have a tutor or a teacher, you're in a class or you're starting with a tutor, really, you should still be focused on understanding and very little production. Personally, when I have newer students or brand new students, I do have them produce during even the first lesson, but it's like one word at a time. You know, if we're talking about the days of the week or the weather, I draw up a calendar or something and we're looking at the days of the week and I name them off. I might ask something like, what day is this? And it literally says Monday on the calendar that I'm pointing to. And then the student would say Monday, but you know, in whatever target language we're doing, it's that simple. It is 1 word, 2 word answers maybe. But most of the lesson, they're listening and they're looking at pictures. They're looking at aids to go with the things that we're talking about or writing about. We're reading things together. We're listening things together. It is super basic. Finally, if you are somebody who really likes to use apps or flashcards or things like that to get some extra vocab review, at this level, you can if you want, but it's really probably not necessary yet. If you go too hard in the flashcards too early, what you would do is you will probably memorize the vocab, but it's going to be more of an analog to your native language because you are lacking context for that vocab. Personally, for me, when learning a language, I would rather learn new vocab through context. If I'm reading something about farm animals, then all those things are categorized together, and in context, learning those new animal names or learning how to say like pond and field and barn, things like that in context is a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable than it is just to learn these things completely by themselves. I wouldn't spend much time on that, if at all. Just focus on getting good input. Here's your time usage pie chart. This depends on each learner individually and your priorities, your goals for the language. But really, I think when somebody's brand new or close to brand new, that listening should be the vast majority of what you do, because you can get so much more visual aid through videos, and you can do so much more listening in shorter time than you can reading. You need to do the reading. You have to do the reading. You've got to develop that skill. We talked about learning to read and then reading to learn and building fluency and all that. You have to do it. But because listening is so much more readily available, I think you should prioritize it and get as much going as you can. You can do it a lot more passively, like we said, listening to things while you're walking around or doing other stuff. You can watch videos. That's a lot easier. It's faster. You can let those unknown things kind of go, and you can just grab onto whatever you understand. And because of all that, I think that listening is more attainable to spend a large chunk of time on as opposed to your reading. You can adjust this for your goals, and maybe you have a little sliver in there for output if you're in a class or you're with a tutor or something like that. But I think it should look something like this. Priorities for intermediate learners. We still have high quality input from real sources as the top priority. For beginners, we said to stick to very familiar, simple, easy topics. As an intermediate, you're sort of at this cool point where you have built enough of a base that you've already been exploring the familiar topics. You can still continue to do that, and you will need to continue to do that. But now you're in a position to start exploring new topics and broaden your knowledge. And as an intermediate, you can go and find a lot of materials now on your own without needing somebody to curate those or find them for you, because you probably understand enough of the language to now use it to go and get more language. As an intermediate, you really need people to start communicating with, because you have to start working on your speaking and your writing, both in informal and formal contexts. Again, that could be a tutor, it could be a teacher, it could be speakers of the target language, whether you live in that target language and that culture, or you know people. You've got to start practicing that recall and practicing formulating your thoughts and practicing circumlocuting your ideas and negotiating with the other speakers. You've got to get that practice in. And as an intermediate, you should have more than enough vocab now to do those things. In addition to that speaking practice of various types, the formal writing practice is also necessary. This is why when I'm tutoring people, even if they're just learning a language, say to travel, which is fairly informal, I still have them do types of formal writing. So I might say, you need to write a few paragraphs on a topic, maybe on one of your interests. Tell me about one of your hobbies and why it's your hobby and what it means to you, why it's important, and so on. Got to get those skills built. Vocab review it as an intermediate and advanced and later on. I think this is now more relevant because you already have a lot of context in the target language, and now you're bolstering that, you're building that, supporting it with additional review. This can be especially good if you are learning through a source material. Like if I'm reading a book, I might collect new vocab while I'm going through the book, and those would become my flashcards because it's relevant and it's all contextualized. Here's a rough time usage chart, what I think would be good for an intermediate learner. Listening is still the bulk because again, it is highly available and you can have it going way more often than you have these other opportunities. Reading is more important now though, because you've got to start reading and you've got to read a lot and a lot. Reading is so important for developing your language. Even if you are not planning on being an avid reader, it is crucial for language development. You've got to do it. If there's anything I wish all of my students would do who I tutor, it's that I wish all of them would read 2 or 3 times the amount that they do. I'm sure they would all see more success, but I'm not here to hate on them. They're great. Everybody should read more. And of course, on this chart, we've got room now, considerable room for speaking and writing. Speaking should naturally happen more because if you're in a class or with a tutor, you get to speak a lot more and writing takes more time. So these are all estimates, but you've got to integrate these in a big way. You could never possibly catch up to reading and listening because of how accessible those things are, but you've got to start making concerted efforts to speak and write and build your recall skills and your writing skills, your speaking skills. And as an intermediate, again, you have the vocab to do it. Okay, advanced students, we still need high quality input, but now you're going to explore any topics, and you should probably be seeking out unfamiliar topics, because this level, you've already learned to read, and now you've already been reading to learn things. You should be seeking to learn about new things that you may not even be familiar with in your native language. Now you're going to learn about them in your new language because your skills are high enough to do that. You're especially going to dive into more technical and specific meaning of things. So nuance is the key here. Deeper vocab on specific topics. That's the difference between me being able to say, that's a house, that's an apartment, versus saying, that's a house, there's all these different kinds of rooms in the house. There's the kitchen and the bathroom, and there are fixtures in those rooms. Like the kitchen has the fridge and this and that and the other. You're getting more and more in depth and more technical. As an advanced learner, the more communication that you have, the more output that you have, the better, because now you've got a lot of vocab and you need to start getting nuanced in your communication on more and more topics. So think of the things that you would do if you're a native English speaker or you're an American like me. Think of the things that you would have done in a language arts class. You're writing essays, you're writing a thesis, you are writing argumentative things, you're trying to persuade people. Those are higher language skills. That's the thing that as you get really good in your new language, that's the thing you need to start working on, but in the new language. Also, travel. I think you could do this at any point and it will always be beneficial. But if you're an intermediate or an advanced learner, travel becomes just the greatest, because now you're getting a payoff for all the work that you've put in, and you will learn a ton from all of the new people that you meet, the nuanced interactions, the wide variety of speakers. It's amazing. If you haven't been, by the time you get to advanced, make a point to go. Okay, vocab review, same thing as intermediate. It can help support your vocab acquisition of the new things, especially with the more specific or technical terms. Here's what I think is another realistic time usage chart for advanced learners. Reading still at 30%, listening has dropped a little bit to give more room to speaking. I still left writing at 10, but again, you're always adjusting this to your goals and your priorities and what you are going to need to use the language for in the future. If you're going to go to college in Portugal, then you need to put way more time into writing and reading and technical knowledge than somebody who really just wants to travel a lot. Okay, everybody, that's it. That's the language diet video. I hope you took some things away from this. Heck, it probably would have been good if you took some notes. Maybe I should have said that at the beginning. That'd have been helpful. Well, that's okay. Just rewind it. Thank you for watching as always. And if there's somebody else that you know, maybe trying to acquire a language, maybe trying to change up how they're studying a language, send it their way. That would be helpful. Maybe for me and them, I would hope. Until next time, language learners. Ciao. Woo! Oh, buddy.